Hi, I'm Ralph Preston, and every Tuesday we've got these Zoom meetings on recovery and science where we try and bring you some valuable information you can use in your recovery. And today, back for the second time, sound like a TV announcer or something, we've got Dr. Luke L.A. We know each other, so I often call him Luke, but I figure anybody that went and got all that, like Dr. Hetsler, I figure anybody that got all that education deserves to be called doctor. Anyway, um, Luke's going to talk today about transitioning. And so rather than me give his presentation, um, I'll just let him do it. So, Luke, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ralph. I'm so excited to be here again. Let me just get everything up and away. All right. Yeah, really excited to be here back with Stroke Buddies. Just always so impressed as I'm in that group and seeing these presentations. It's just an absolutely incredible resource for anybody recovering from a stroke, but then anybody that really is in that whole network and in that whole space. It's just an absolutely incredible resource that I can't really promote enough to my patients and really anybody that's involved in the stroke community. So I appreciate the opportunity to be involved. So today we're going to be talking a lot about the transition to home, and so how to find success with that, how to focus in on specific areas of opportunity, and whatnot. With our small group here, I would be super excited to have a little bit of participation as it's really going to be a facilitated discussion, right? I haven't returned home from a stroke. I have a lot of familiarity with that transition and what it looks like for you all, but you guys all lived it and you guys have that distinct ability to share those experiences and really have a true understanding of what it means to go home and recover. So just to get us set up, can you guys all put a number 1 in the chat just so that I know you guys have it up and that we're all ready to go, and then we'll get going forward. Thanks, Ralph. Yeah, just that one. Just a fun way to have some participation throughout because I'm just going to be really curious to hear what insights you all have. All right. So a little bit about my background and how I ended up here today. So I'm a doctor of physical therapy. I'm a health and well-being coach, but I didn't set out throughout PT school thinking I was going to go in that direction. Like a lot of people that get into physical therapy, I was super interested in working with athletes, working with acute injuries, and helping people get back to their true performance. And so I spent a lot of time in varsity athletics, working with athletes, personal training, strength and conditioning. And what I learned from an opportunity where I was at Spalding Rehab Hospital in Boston, their inpatient rehab, is that physical therapists can really have a much bigger impact on people's ability to engage in what they enjoy day to day in terms of just finding success in their overall life than just treating acute injuries and helping the top athletes maximize their performance. And so that was a truly eye-opening opportunity for me and has completely transitioned my physical therapy career since. I started my career at Rusk Rehab in Brooklyn. And so that was an incredible opportunity to work with a varying patient demographics that are all recovering and working towards the same goal of getting back home. And so one thing that I was noticing throughout, honestly, the experience with working with the varsity athletes back in college to working with people transitioning back home is that there is a missing piece in terms of how we have discussions with patients around why it matters to them, and how we can integrate their goals and their values upon the discharge home. I think that often as clinicians, we get confused between what's the most recommended option and what we truly believe the patient could do and what the patient will actually find success on their own doing when they first go home. And so we'll be talking more about that and how we can integrate those two things to continue to maintain our recommended research-driven opinion, but also integrating the patient's values as well. So, in terms of new normal, I think that that framework as a clinician and I'm guessing as patients has a lot of emotional opinions about it. Is this a familiar topic of discussion for you guys? Can you drop a one in the chat if you've heard of this framework or this idea? Yeah, thank you, Carol. So as we're going through this, like when I hear the phrase new normal, honestly, like I feel my stomach come up to my throat. Like the response to that and like the idealistic assumption that comes with that is pretty unnerving. I'm not sure if any of you guys feel that same way, but um, that is an interesting topic that we talk about with patients, and we use that to talk about, well, how are they going to find success when they go home? How are they going to be able to find consistency in their day to day and really take back control of what matters to them and what their life looked like beforehand? So, as you all know, right, when you go home and when you're recovering throughout the hospital, it's an evolving picture. And so it's not really just about going home, right? Like at first, it's like, okay, like how do I get home? How do I create that plan with my friends, my family, the other providers involved in my care to find success in that transition? But then the secondary component is really around how do I prevent myself from ever going back to the hospital again and really turn my health and myself towards a more successful version and a sustainable version that you now truly value and want to pursue. And so, one incredible analogy that I've been using a lot more frequently is thinking about your hospital experience and your inpatient rehab experience as driver's ed. So, just like in driver's ed, right, you learn the rules of the road. You have somebody there with you talking through any problem that may arise, helping you really understand how you can take certain risks when you go home or when you hit the streets, like when to start driving on the highway, when to start driving in the city, all those different components. But then, just like driver's ed, when you leave the hospital or inpatient rehab, you're set to take yourself to the road, right? You hit the streets, and then you're left with all the uncertainty, all the unique adversities or problems that come with that experience. And you're not able to go back and talk to your driver instructor necessarily and say, hey, like I've been experiencing this, or I've been having a lot of trouble parallel parking on the left side of the street. And so that bridge to going home leaves you kind of up to your own devices to problem solve. And so that is truly a limitation of the healthcare industry is we know it, right? And I know you can speak on this too, Dr. Hetzler, that unfortunately as clinicians, right, we're not able to provide continuity from the inpatient stay to home, right? We don't get to message our patients and say a month later and say, hey, how's it going? Like, were you able to find success with starting to walk with the cane? And that's an unfortunate limitation, right? Because we were the people that helped you make that plan, right? We know the full backstory. We know why we made that decision together. But unfortunately, it's a major limitation that then we leave you to your own devices to make that to problem solve those changes, which can really leave you feeling alone. I mean, I'm guessing a lot of you guys are super involved in the Facebook group, and I cannot count how many times people say, I mean, on my posts, on any other posts of how alone they feel and who's responsible for their recovery, nobody but themselves, which Ralph, as we talk about all the time, is true, right? You are the constant in your care. I say to patients all the time when I'm working with them that um, when like for example, like a patient that isn't super involved in their care, right? Saying like, It doesn't matter if your daughter's managing your care or your wife is managing your care. You're the one that's always there when you have to get up out of bed, when you have to leave and go get groceries, when you have to get yourself dressed, right? They're not going to be the one that's going to be there every single time. And so you need to carry that over. Yes. But that doesn't mean you're alone in your care long term or alone in your recovery long term. So one huge realization I've had throughout working as a clinician and then working with patients and people in my program is that we really, as physical therapists and as providers, can provide a lot more than discharge planning, right? And education around how to find success when you go home. One primary example I've had of this is works with a person that had a huge hemorrhage, unfortunately, at the young age of 35. And he was aware of the comorbidities, so like the things that he wanted to change in his day-to-day that led to that hemorrhage. So he knew that he should be exercising more. He knew that he should have made some changes to his diet. He knew that he needed to lose weight, right? Like he had had the doctors tell him that, but that didn't necessarily give him the tools to figure out what food should I be eating? What exercises are best for me based on me and my goals? How can I fit that into my day? Like I work two jobs and overnights and I'm tired when I get back. Like, do I have to do it when I get back from work? And so having that problem solving discussion never took place, right? So he never really was able to, despite all the trial and error that he did before, never was able to find something that stuck, right? He saw friends running online, right? And he was like, oh, maybe running will be for me, but that didn't stick. And so, for example, it's hard to know like what form of exercise would work best for him. Um, so I'm really curious. I would love to ask a couple of you coming off mute. Um, so in terms of his transition to home, right? So how this kind of came full circle is that when he transitioned home, right, that motivation to make those lifestyle changes around more exercise, managing his weight, working on addressing his hypertension, were still there, just like they were before the hemorrhage. And now he's more motivated, but that still didn't give him the tools to figure out how to integrate it into his day to day, right? So it needs to be a proactive conversation around what forms of exercise do you enjoy? What forms of exercise do you want to try to get back to? What is one strategy you could use to manage your weight? And those individualized based educational questions really were the game changer in his transition to home, right? It helped him figure out what strategies he could use to eat better, to try to track his weight, to try to set goals long term for how he's going to manage his hypertension. And that was a key to him finding long-term success in transitioning to work much faster than what our neurologists and our physiatrists anticipated for him because he was able to individualize his recovery. So I'm curious to see, going back to coming off mute or coming into the chat, I'm curious to hear what was when you left the hospital in from whatever status you were in, whether you just left after the acute setting or rehab setting, what was your number one goal in terms of getting back to driving, in terms of getting back to work, in terms of getting back to, I mean, quilting with your friends and getting back to playing with friends and family, whatever it is, what was your number one goal?
Well, I guess I could talk if you'd like, if no one else.
Please, Dr. Hetzler. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Okay, well, I couldn't wait to get home. I was tired of being in hospitals and nursing homes and wanted to get home. I thought everything would be easier when I got home. Well, it sure wasn't easier for my wife,
Yeah. Yeah,
my
yeah.
caregiver. And also, I realized very quickly that I could no longer drive. What was I going to do about that? Well,
Right.
I found a place here in Appleton where there was a woman that worked with people who'd had a stroke or other problem, and I did take a course in learning how to drive. And my wife and I realized that we had to sell. We had two cars, but they were both stick shift, and I could not drive a stick shift anymore.
Right.
So we sold both of those and bought a new one, which was automatic transmission. And for me, it had to have some adjustments. It had to have, and I learned this from the course I took at a hospital on how to drive. Had to have a knob put on the steering wheel and an extension of the turn signal.
Yeah.
And then I took this class and then had to regain my driver's license. I had to go into the Department of Motor Vehicles and retake the written test, which was now computerized, and then have a driving test. And so I
Wow.
ultimately did get my driver's license.
Right. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was very pleased. And then I wanted to go back to teaching. I was a professor at Lawrence University here in Appleton, psychology and neuroscience, and wanted to do that. But before I could do that, I had to take an 8-hour neuropsychological test to prove
Wow.
that I still had the cognitive abilities to do that. Luckily, it was divided into two 4-hour sessions, and I took that from a clinical psychologist, wrote the results, and sent the results to me and the provost of the university. And basically, I passed that with flying colors, so they
Yeah.
welcomed me back to the faculty. Well, that was good, but then how do I teach? I couldn't stand at the blackboard or whiteboard anymore.
Right.
So I had to transfer everything to PowerPoints. And initially, my wife had to push me into the classroom in a wheelchair. Gradually, I learned how to walk um, with a cane. But all of my lectures were converted to PowerPoints.
Yeah.
Uh, so these are transitions. And I read something today actually on Flint Rehab that I thought was very useful and
Mm.
would have been more useful earlier. And that's the importance of the word yet. I can't do this yet.
Right. Right, right.
And so
Definitely.
I think it's important to remember that regardless of our stage in recovery, that I can't do this yet.
Right. Right, right. That's an incredible word. Absolutely. And extremely applicable to our discussion today. I really appreciate that story, especially around the return to driving, Dr. Hetzler, because really what it was an incredible representation of is um, once you do have that picture of exactly what you want to accomplish, right, in terms of getting back to driving so that you can get to work and go back to those activities, there is an incredible amount of steps that have to take place along the way that motivator of that long-term picture drove you to achieve, right? You
Yes,
knew that is what you want to accomplish. And so it's an incredible representation of your motivation and also your diligence to achieve that. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
I,
Um,
I, I can
oh,
talk
go ahead, Ralph.
a little bit. Couple things I thought of when you were talking. That is, you go from having all the doctors and physical therapists and nurses and everybody around you, plenty of people ask questions to. You go home, you're not completely cut off from that, but you're somewhat cut off from all that. And you really do feel maybe more alone than you should. I mean, you can't call back to the rehab hospital 5 times a day. So
Right.
you lose, you know, you lose your source of answers. Um, that's one thing. And the other thing is, you're sitting there in the rehab hospital, you had a stroke, you don't know what's going to happen to you. And, but more importantly, in terms of this discussion, is you don't know what to ask. You don't know. I didn't know. I didn't even think about going home. Well, I did because everybody around me wanted to go home. And some of them wouldn't even do their physical therapy. It's like they're going to get wheeled in the wheelchair across the transom of their front door and stand up and go back to their old life.
Mm.
I knew that wasn't going to happen. I actually wanted to stay in the rehab hospital 3 more weeks. I wasn't in a bunch of different hospitals like Dr. Hetsler. But of course, insurance had their thoughts on that. I thought to myself, I'm here with all these resources and all this therapy, 5 sessions a day, and I'd just like to stay here and get better. That was my main goal when I got home. I wanted to get my hand back so I could operate cameras, and I wanted to be able to walk, and I wanted to be as normal as possible. And I was still
Right.
struggling with that. By the way, stroke survivors, a lot of them newbies don't like that term, new normal, because
Yeah.
they're still trying. You know this. They're still trying to go back, and they still think that they could go back to their
Right.
old
Right. Right.
old life.
Yeah. Right.
One other thing that I'll let somebody else talk is, um, mine was 17 years ago. There's nothing wrong with the rehab hospital. They're top rated at 60% stroke patients. So they knew stroke. What did they do? They taught me how to get in and out of a car with a dead car out back.
Hmm.
And although I could do a deep knee bend, I could squat almost to the ground and get back up. I went through 15 minutes of getting on and off the toilet training with like a pole dancer pole next to it.
Right.
And that was it. And I got home and I go, how do I take a shower? I called back, oh, we'll go down to the place that got you your wheelchair and get a shower chair.
Mm.
So, um, not all institutions have got, it may have gotten better, I don't know.
Right.
But
Yeah, yeah, they're not fully equipped it's hard for them, just like going back to the driver's ed analogy, right? Like it's hard for them to problem solve every single scenario right there and then in the hospital, because at the end of the day, it's a curated experience. Like walking around the gym in an inpatient rehab is not the same thing. I mean, I'm in New York City, so walking around the gym in the nice tailored environment is nowhere close to walking down the street in New York City. And so
no.
that's a huge conversation that we have all the time around just how that's going to transition to home, and how to take that first step to transitioning home, but then also trying to figure out what the long-term picture that you're striving to achieve, and then what's the steps along the way to get there, which can be the most difficult part, right? Because that does live in the consistency too in the day-to-day. Um, yeah, so I've got a couple comments in the chat. Yeah, so James, in terms of getting back to work, um, that's a great example of like that long-term picture, like Dr. Hetzler was talking about his journey to get back to driving. And so it's important to think about what providers especially, or what people are along in the journey, or what things are you doing on a day-to-day basis to step in that direction, right? And so kind of working backwards from that is super helpful in terms of having more clarity on what you can be doing on a day-to-day basis. So the way I want to go with this discussion now is the other component and the major missing factor around kind of what you were alluding to, Ralph, with the shower situation, is that when we're in inpatient rehab or in the hospital and thinking about getting home, since that's such a strong priority, or getting on to the next rehab, or trying to take that next step, it can be difficult to also think about making changes around preventing future readmission, but also like changes to find more success. And so one interesting example of that is around the discharge planning when you're in the hospital, is around, oh, how do you walk around the house as independently as possible? How do you get dressed as independently as possible? How do you get back to eating? But like Dr. Hetsler was talking about, his top priority was getting back to driving. And so figuring out how you can encourage somebody when they go home to pursue that goal, really, you're just giving him, like his example was, he had to take all the autonomy and manage that and pursue that goal without any really continuity from the bedside. And so it's a major gap in terms of the whole system, and in terms of the support that we could be providing to our patients and people as they go home.
One thing I noticed was I had occupational therapy. I had two kinds of occupational therapy, actually. I went to hand and arm class on an individual occupational therapy thing, and then I had occupational therapists come around every morning and talk about things like getting your pants on, and those kinds of personal living, day-to-day living things. But, and I noticed also, I said that there wasn't much planning on the part of the rehab hospital in terms of sending me home. But there was another group when they, I guess they kind of divided people into like what they thought they were, how much they could do on their own.
Hmm.
Because there were people who were clearly not going to get out of the wheelchair anytime soon. And so they had plans there where they talked to, I saw them, next to me, talking to them about installing grab bars and adapting the house and everything. I guess
Right.
it was a good thing. I guess they decided I didn't need all that, and they basically just sent me home.
Right. Right. Right.
I'm
Yeah.
not
I mean,
complaining, but
that is the other component of the spectrum is that with the governor of insurance and the framework of say like it just being like some people would say simply put like in, rehab is about giving you the amount of time that's needed to make sure that you're safe going home, and then depending upon what level of support you have and what adjustments you're able to make to the house will determine when you go there, which is kind of a difficult ebb and flow as a provider of how that works, because obviously we want to keep people no matter what accommodations they are able to make when they go home. We want to keep them as long as possible. To your point, Ralph, of yeah, I could go home, but I want to make more progress here, and so that's a huge gray area of when we're able to keep people. That's super frustrating because it should be about a total amount of recovery versus just trying to figure out how to problem solve going home too.
plus there's no real, what I would call continuum of care. The hospital, once the insurance companies stop paying for you, I mean, they answer my questions and stuff, but I'm no longer like a patient there. They're not getting paid to help me. So, and then, you go home, they order rehab. Some people wait around and say, oh, I'm waiting for them to call me. I called them. Uh,
Right,
and I believe in being real proactive. Uh,
right, right,
and
right.
so, uh, you know, it's not going to happen, but insurance, because of insurance, but insurance ought to basically declare this some kind of life event, and you ought to get, when you go home, you ought to get a stroke coordinator, and but that's not going to happen. Actually, my insurance company, Blue Cross, assigned me a neurological nurse, and I did call her a few times.
Hmm.
Main motivation was for keeping me from having a second stroke because they didn't want to shell out another 100,000 bucks.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, and that's an incredible transition to like the slide up now around just like the system. The limitations are truly in the system, right? It doesn't allow for that continuity of care. Um, And so there can be the referral of like going to the getting the referral of the neurological nurse, but that there's so many ways that people can just fall through the cracks, unfortunately, without the continuity of follow-up. And so it takes a ton of proactivity and a ton of personal insight to really have straight like what resources you have to pursue in your corner, right? Like knowing exactly what your target areas is has to be done first before you can know what providers you need to pursue. Because at first, when you go home, it's like, well, everything is different. Like, where do I even start? And so without that continuity, it's so hard to know what the next turn is too.
Well, and it's changed a lot. I couldn't find anything on stroke recovery. I found things on stroke prevention, what is stroke, like on YouTube and on the internet. And I couldn't find a single video on stroke recovery.
Hmm.
And now there are, 100, 500 channels on stroke recovery. I got one with 400 stroke videos on it. So the landscape's real different now as we've moved into a more digital age.
Yeah, yeah, and the resources are all there, right? Like what I talk about all the time is that there's no shortage in education in healthcare, right? The education is there on everything that's best for you to do, everything that you need to do. But the part that's gapping is how do you determine what information is best for you and most important for you to focus on? Because more is not always better in terms of helping you make that decision and helping you increase your motivation. we talk all the time about like clarity creates motivation. So when you're clear on what you need to be doing on a day-to-day basis and what you need to focus on in your recovery, it allows you to be much more motivated to do so because you see exactly where it's going to go.
You got a
Without
target.
that clarity, right? And without that clarity, it's hard to know. It just feels like guesswork. Um, so the part that I really want to transition towards is about talking more about preventing future readmission and just trying to figure out kind of, I guess, what we're talking about now, but how to maximize the progress when you transition home, and prevent any future complications in your health. The structure, like we've been talking about around leaving the healthcare system, is about going home, right? That's their job, is to get you out of the hospital and get you home back to where you were going before. And so all of the education around preventing readmission, addressing those things that you're already struggling with your health, whether it's blood pressure, diabetes, or whatnot, stress, um, that's all secondary. And that really becomes the focus once you go home. And so what I talk about is that the going home is really, there's twofold, right? So there's the first step of finding peace in your day to day, finding that new normal of like really how you can find the same joy that you had before in the components of your life, whether it's work, whether it's driving, whether it's leaving the house, whether it's exercising, whether it's going to the beach or whatnot. But then the secondary goal is making the changes that are needed or keeping up with your rehab, whatever work is needed to prevent future complications and make the turn towards the better for your long term. And that really can be secondary to, unfortunately, what the resources are in the inpatient setting. So this number is our reality, depending upon what source you look at. The rate of readmission after a stroke is 25% at a minimum. It really depends upon the patient demographic, type of stroke, but that is an incredible statistic. And so that's due to obviously what's called like the physiological changes that happen to your brain when you have a stroke, right? The trauma to the vascular system. And Dr. Hetsler could talk to much more extensively about this, but there's a physiological component that happens when you have a stroke that allows you, increases the likelihood that you have another one in a vacuum if things were the exact same case. But then there's also the component of to my patient, the person that I was talking about earlier, that was trying to make the changes day to day around exercise, diet, hypertension before. They're not now given the strategies to make those changes now that they've had a stroke, right? He was still struggling to figure out how to fit those things into his day to day. And just because he's so much more motivated now, and promise me, he was motivated. Like he was chomping at the bit, trying to figure out how to prevent this from ever happening again at the age of 35. And it still was difficult for him to fit these things into his routine and figure out how to find the motivation day to day and the excitement because they were not things that he previously enjoyed. And so that is really the part that's in our control, especially around addressing the likelihood of readmission and recurrent stroke. And it's really something that for a lot of people is entirely new, right? It's an unfortunate thing that people have had hypertension for years and years that they never knew, and or they knew and they never could figure out what they could do day to day to address it. And now they're going home and they're like, wow, like I had no idea that it would cause a stroke. I'm definitely more motivated now, but they're still trying to figure out how to grocery shop appropriately to to manage that. And that's a difficult barrier to problem solve on your own. So, in terms of addressing this, right, it's truly a lot of people turn to, and we think of as clinicians, like it's really about resources. It's about more referrals. It's about more interventions. It's about more education and more knowledge of trying to determine what's the best one, right? Like, what is the most recommended change to make to address my hypertension? But what really is the conversation is what's the best strategy that you already have familiarity with and you already use to address something like this? Um, and so that is a bit of a different conversation, right? And so the reason why that can be differentiated is because the familiarity of a strategy leads to so much more success, so much more enjoyment, and so much more long-term consistency than trying to fit something entirely new that's recommended just based on general recommendations rather than fitting that into your routine can be so much more difficult. The other component to this is really around the consistency, right? Stroke recovery, as we're all very well aware, is a long-term picture, right? It evolves over time. We know that at first, right, you make a lot faster progress than long-term. And so the progress long-term lives in the consistency in what you're doing day to day. And what allows for that consistency is finding enjoyment, seeing value, and really being able to maintain motivation as the progress tapers, because it forever will return and recover, but it slows down, right? And so the long-term picture and the likelihood that you're able to achieve that completely lives in the execution, the consistency on a daily basis. So we're going to go to another discussion now. And this is something we've been talking about throughout this discussion. And one example of this is like Dr. Hetzler with getting back to driving. But having that clear picture of what is the specific thing that you want to return to. And so what I mean by that is it needs to be much more specific than just like, I want to be able to walk again, or I want to be able to even just walk outside. It's, I want to be able to walk to the park, right? I want to be able to walk with my niece, or I want to be able to walk to the grocery store. And so, although those are all walking, right, that specificity allows for our tailored intervention. So, some examples of that are if it's walking to the grocery store, right? Like we need to practice walking with being able to carry, right? So, that involves thinking about if we can progress your assistive device to allow you to carry something, so that's one specific example of how that specificity can help individualize your care and then also increase your motivation because you know and you see the value and how it directly pertains to you and your goals. Often, a lot of people, the answer to this question on the screen is, I want to be doing what I was doing before. I want to go back to how I was before. And as you talked about, Ralph, like that new normal doesn't mean that it has to be not do like new normal doesn't mean finding peace with how you're doing now and coming to terms with the fact that you can't do certain things. New normal is figuring out how knowing what those things you want to do are day to day and figuring out how to make those that idea become your reality in terms of the stepping stones to get you there directly to, I mean, Dr. Hetzler's point was incredible around the driving, right? Once that was clear, that picture, and he had the value and knew that it was something super important to him, although the steps were extremely extensive as he listed, he still was able to get there because he had that driving motivation to figure out that long-term goal.
Well, those actually require a little bit of acceptance, maybe not total acceptance yet,
Yeah.
but until you have at least some level of acceptance, it's people don't tend to set goals or set their sights, and
Right,
that
right.
therefore the picture that they're trying to create is an old picture rather than a new picture.
Right. So, I mean, we're going to transition in this direction, but to get a lot of people, as we're talking about, have a super clear picture of what their finish line looks like where they're trying to go with their recovery, whether that's just same thing as before. I want to do exactly the same things. But the key and exactly to your point is where's that starting line? And so having that understanding of what you're able to achieve now and what things are more difficult is the key to figuring out where you can go. And so that comes with coming to terms with that a lot too. which like on the negative end means that like when people are never able to come to terms or a more of an understanding of where they're starting from, it makes it super difficult for them to ever make any progress, as we've all really seen. So I'm curious, I really want to talk a little bit more about this question. So this question, what would an ideal day look like for your life and your recovery? So what I mean by that is based on your goals or based on what your goal was for your recovery, if it's been a while since you've made all that progress and have created the life you're living now, what was like the best day that you could create for yourself to reach that long-term picture? Like, was it involving exercise? Was it involving working with a physical therapist? Was it involving getting education from a nutritionist? What was the most productive day, or what would the most productive day look like with your recovery? And I know that's a long-winded question, but I'm curious to hear if anybody has any insights to share.
Mine was to have motivation and energy to do physical therapy all day long, so because I was working on my goal of getting as much of physical movement back as I could.
Yeah, so it was really about trying to figure out how successful you could be with that exercise and that opportunity to work with a physical therapist. And so that's when you were able to do that, that led to a lot of success. Yeah, that's a great example.
I did have some therapy, but I did 10 times more at home.
Mm. Yeah, which is key. That's incredible. Does anybody have any examples? Feel free to share in the chat as well if you're unable to come off mute.
Yeah, mine to me personally, I think what really helped me was my consistency because I didn't have the support system like the normal person. I said I had a counselor at Michigan Rehab that basically said I had the mind of a 2-year or what that I can do for the month. So basically, I had to learn how to motivate myself, and I'm glad that I've done that because it's just like I had to really find out who I was and whose I was, and just taught this the thought of my mind just for that individual to say that I couldn't do something. That's all the motivation that I needed.
Mm,
I think what a lot of people with their recovery, their lack of motivation,
mm,
because you sit there and you in your mind you are trapped to say I can't do this and I can't do that. So the mind is a powerful tool. If somebody tells you that you can't do something, with me personally, I said I would rather show you and what
mm.
I
Yeah,
wanted to
yeah.
do. So, and this is where we have to almost just like a computer. We have to really how can I say just really just wipe everything clean, and stuff. A lot of people want to have the same thoughts of what they used to do. Like I said, when it happened to me, when I was 23, I was in college and just finished college and stuff. And I had to really forget about that. How can you move forward if you're still looking behind you?
Mm,
So that was one of the major issues that I was, mentally, because I was sitting there trying to think about I was when I was 23.
mm,
I'm 53 now. I can't continue doing the same thing that I was when I was 23. So I had to learn how to adapt to the new change. And I think when we have to look at the recovery process is almost like a chameleon. We
mm,
have to learn how to adapt to the new normal, like you said, with the new normal and stuff. So one thing that really helped me is, like I said, on a consistent basis, is having a support system.
mm.
I think when Zoom came and all of that opened the floodgates for people.
Yeah.
So
That's,
now you can actually see that support system from everybody else around that's going through the same situations that I'm going through. So I was like, well, that's where I got my recovery for, because everybody like Ralph and everybody here, they're trying to seek information of
Right.
how to pick up these pieces. And I think that's what it is when we go through life challenging action issues and stuff. We have to, our whole situation is into broken pieces.
Mm.
How do you pick those pieces up?
Right.
And
Right.
even like with a puzzle, some of those pieces probably fell on the ground and we don't know where they are.
Hmm.
So how do
Right. Right.
you get that one piece that say, okay, now I can start get this picture back together in my life.
Right. Right.
So, and the one thing that really helps is the consistency.
Hmm.
And you can't say, well, I'm gonna go to this group and only go once a month.
Right.
You need this support system with a community where we can build each other up.
Right.
I think a lot of people look at recovery as like rocket science,
Yeah.
you
Definitely.
know. So when
Right.
as we work as a team to build each other instead of thinking about individual progress, then
Mhm.
we can all win. There's no reason for everyone just to be sitting here in a box
Right.
and say,
Jamon,
well, yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious,
Go
and
ahead.
it's so good to see you. I didn't realize you had come onto
Yes.
the call, so thank you for joining. My
Yes.
question to you is really how do I think I know the answer to this question, but how do you
Mhm.
feel like you found so much consistency in your recovery process besides just the driving motivator of showing the people that said you never could that you, of course,
Mhm.
will? How do you feel like you found that success?
My success was because of the support system. If I didn't have a mother, a father, a wife that's been very supportive,
Hmm.
you know, that like I said, you got to build anything, you got to have a solid foundation. If you don't have a solid foundation, even if like I said, we have these platforms now, which is like I said, some people have to just seek and find the right fit on things. When I found the group with Ralph, I'm like, I can breathe.
Mm.
you know, and
Yeah, that's
I feel like I'm in my happy place, and stuff like that, where I can really learn from each other and the individuals. I learned so much from Ralph to Carol to Dr. Hessler. I learned from everybody. We can't stop learning
right.
at this point in our lives. We can't say I can't do this.
Right. Yeah.
And I think, like I said, 87% of people are negative. So
Yeah.
we got to change that ratio somehow, some way.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, when that my Michigan rehab um counselor said that to me, that's all the motivation that I needed.
Right. Right,
You
right.
know,
Yeah, I know it's
so
important. It's important
yeah.
to like have that in the forefront of your mind when you feel like
Hmm.
more difficult that you
Yeah.
remember why you started the process. And so I appreciate
Abs-
you sharing.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
and to Damon's point, right? Like
Yeah.
in terms of guiding your rehab and finding that consistency day to day, right? I'm guessing that one of the first steps is, okay, I needed to prove these people wrong. I need to achieve what I want for my recovery. What are the missing pieces that I do need to fill in the gaps, right? What groups on Facebook, for example, do I need to pursue to help me cope with the adversities of getting back and recovering throughout the process? What therapy services to Ralph's different OT services to help really clue in on his hands? Like, what resources does he need to pursue to really make that happen? What people in your community, what family members, what friends are really going to be there along for the ride to help fill in when you feel less motivated day to day to give you that encouragement? And so, once you have that clear long-term picture of what you're trying to achieve with your recovery, it becomes much more clear or can become much more clear in terms of how you can identify resources or pursue resources to fill in along the way. Um, I think that some people, I guess, to kind of bringing this directly to the Facebook group, right? Like some people are like, oh man, I got so lucky that I found this. Well, it's like, yeah, you got lucky, but you were in pursuit of filling in a gap in your recovery, right? You knew that you needed support in the community to that can hear where you're coming from and understand where you're coming from. And so, yeah, you got lucky, I guess, in finding the right one, maybe, but your pursuit in filling in that gap, you should give, and we should all give it, I mean, in our own paths, incredible pat on the back for just finding that gap and identifying a resource to fill in that because that's key, right? And it really helps. So going back to the starting line, I think we've hammered this point, but to really think about we really know what that long-term picture looks like, right? And so determining and to Ralph's point, coming to peace with or an understanding of where you are now is really this important to understanding where it can go long term. And so that just is so crucial for providing that clarity and motivation on a day-to-day basis. So as we're wrapping up here, I know we're getting close to the hour. And I think that this is an incredible bridge from Damon's point that one huge differentiator that I've learned from being present in the Facebook groups around stroke survivors and really discussing them with people that I know that or have been working with that have had strokes that it really is a communal effort. It takes a cohort together to really maximize that recovery. And that's something that is super difficult to replicate on the transition home, right? Like when you're in the hospital, you're around possibly other patients that have had a stroke. And so you have direct contact. And then unless you pursue support groups like this, it's difficult to know or find people that are along with you in the recovery. And so what I really would like to talk to you all about and what I'm curious to offer to those of you also following along on YouTube or watching this later on is that what I'm going to be doing directly in my cohort and in my program is doing cohort groups around that are focusing specifically from the diagnosis of stroke recovery. So having people come in together and working along their recovery process in a group mentality with themed discussions throughout the week, opportunity for them to discuss with each other and just not be alone in their recovery process as I'm working with them on whatever specific goal that they come to me with. So what I'm going to ask you to do is if you're on your computer, you can press scan this and then I'm going to let me get this up. So, and then if you're on your phone, the direct link is here. So what this offer is so you're going to go, it's my link tree. There's an opportunity to learn more about me on my website. There's an opportunity to like have continued discussions around this topic. But one of the opportunities on that link is a intro call. And so that intro call is an opportunity to talk more about how you could find more consistency. But my promise to every single person that gets onto that intro call is guidance in terms of what their next step could be, whether it's identifying, thanks, Ralph. Whether it's identifying what provider they should pursue instead of myself, or learning more about the program and then deciding that this cohort is best for them, or whether it's giving them the education and helping them leave with the insight around how they could find more consistency in their day-to-day. That's truly my promise to anybody that comes onto this call. It's a completely free consultation in non-committal, but it's really just a good opportunity to try to clue into how else you could progress in your recovery process. So that's in the scan me, and that's also in the link in the messenger for those of you following along on YouTube as well.
All right.
So I'm curious, I mean, I know you might be going to the same thing, but I'm curious, any questions, any final thoughts around this discussion? I'm just curious to hear if there's any
I
insight
I
before we
was
wrap.
gonna, I was gonna ask if anybody had any questions.
Yeah.
We don't
Yeah.
have we don't have an hour limit. You might. I don't know what your schedule allows.
No, yeah, no, I'm available. I was hoping to keep the presentation to an hour, but we can discuss as long as people are interested.
Anybody got any questions? Don't all speak at once.
Feel free to put them in the chat as well. I know it's difficult for people to come off of mute.
Okay, you dropped the link tree link in the chat as well. Well, I got more I could say, but I'm not the presenter.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, Ralph. I mean, just as a kind of a final note here of, I've been super appreciative through our discussions around your insight around feeling alone in your recovery and feeling like it is all in your hands. And so, not to put you on the spot, but I think that you have an incredible insight on this, and I'd be curious to hear, or if you could provide more clarity on your perspective on that.
Well, somewhere in my head, I knew that, I guess before I left the rehab hospital, I heard the 800,000 figure. So I knew I wasn't the only one, but that didn't prevent me from when I got home and had limited mobility and was mostly doing PT all day, not engaging with a lot of people, and certainly not with other stroke survivors unless I went to physical or occupational therapy, and there I just basically saw them. The net result was I ended up feeling like I was all alone, like this was the only person that had happened to me.
Hmm.
I was the only person that it happened to. And I think part of that had to do with the lack of resources I mentioned. I blogged early on in 2009. I wrote something about how we need more resources, recovery resources, so we don't feel so alone and abandoned.
Hmm.
Here it is 16 years later, and that really hasn't changed all that much. Yeah,
Right.
it's gotten better, but and I think part of this is built into the whole recovery process. I think it's a reaction to the trauma, for lack of a better word. Um, so yeah, I actually, so I went back to the rehab hospital, had a monthly meeting, and I went back to that. Uh,
Hmm.
they also had a twice a week stroke group
Yeah.
with a psychologist, and that was open to whether you. I went once I found out about it early on. I went every time.
Hmm.
That was useful. When I went home, I went back sometimes. If I had appointments, I lived an hour and a half from the rehab hospital, so if
Wow.
I had appointments in Asheville, I would always schedule them so I could either go to the monthly meeting or the twice a week meeting, and
Mhm.
so I tried to engage, but
Yeah.
again,
Yeah, and it's important. I think one thing that can be taken for granted is that when you go to those support groups and when you get those continued resources, right, it's always important, and just I always like to note this, that the application and of applying it to your framework and taking pieces, I mean, same with this presentation, same with any support group, of like applying it directly to you and your goals is super important. And so it's a basic principle, but it's really an important differentiator around how people can integrate things into their recovery versus just feel super overwhelmed with a ton of information and resources.
well, plus there's no real roadmap, no real guidance. That's
Right.
one reason I started doing this. I looked into a lot of things. I just tried to figure it out. I didn't know, actually they had told me 5 things to help with stroke prevention, nutrition, various things. I already did 4 of them, and I was engaged with the community. The one that I found interesting was that to not to isolate yourself. So I knew a little
Yeah.
bit, and I tried to get involved in some stroke groups, but
Right.
th- there's no there's no manual. I mean, some hospitals, and I won't name this one, I'll hold it out of the way so you can't see. Some hospitals provide somewhat of a manual now. Of course, I got like about a 2-page thing, not this is actually a pretty good one. 30 or 40 page thing with questionnaires and fill outs and everything.
Hmm.
It's a lot better than you used to get. Of course,
Yeah.
they send you home with something, you got a hand that doesn't work and you got a book and
Right. Of
you can't
course.
flip through the pages.
Right.
Would really benefit if all the
I
therapists,
have a I
go ahead.
I have a comment, Ralph. That's
Yeah.
okay. I just thank you, Luke, for your presentation. What I appreciated the most was your questions, making us reflect on each of the different questions you provided. And what it does is, it's although no people are not, really responding in that, but we just think, and that I appreciate.
Mm.
The thing for me about recovery is everything about who we are now, or what I am like now, is not only the physical recovery, it is, I find that there are things that get in the way. There are
Mm.
things that keep me strong. And a whole balance of the mindset, for example,
Mm.
can be fragile. Whether you're battling fatigue and then you should, oh shit, I gotta exercise today, but I'm too friggin' tired.
Right.
There's things that just get in the way, what you deal with every day. I'm post-stroke 3 years, and I battle that week, and it's and sometimes, and I live in the country in the bush, so I don't have access to PT or anything. It takes me 3 hours to get anywhere. But anyways, I wanted to thank you for the questions, because
Yeah.
um, we think about those things and reflect on them. So thank you.
Yeah. I appreciate it, Mindy. And one thing that I appreciate you shared is around just those what I refer to as like those tools in your toolbox. Like, what are those things that you use on a day-to-day basis that help you ground yourself in your mindset, that help you ground yourself in your physical health in terms of like knowing that you need to take the walk or get moving, for example, just because you know it will help you feel better. And so it sounds like that's been a priority of yours, which I think it's probably been super helpful in your recovery, I hope.
Gratitude, positive affirmations,
Yeah.
both
Yeah,
pop and
yeah. Yeah. Because I think one thing that you have to, yeah, along recovering from a stroke, right? It can be so difficult to celebrate the successes along the way. And so gratitude on a specific interval can be an incredible reminder to note the progress you have made so far, because it can be gradual but significant.
monitor your progress, set small
Yeah.
goals, small achievable goals, because when you achieve goals, I believe success builds on success. Achieving small goals is a big motivator.
Right. Right.
Also, tracking through pictures or video or whatever, because you can't watch your hair go gray.
Yeah.
Get up every morning, and it's a little bit different. You don't see the changes. And like with stroke, you bump into somebody and they go, "Wow, you're walking so much better," and you go, "Wow, I just thought I was having a crappy walking day, actually."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
so thanks for that. Tracking your progress. I always tell people it's like the stock market. I could call it up. Oh, I don't know. Maybe lately it's not so much, but if you look at a typical stock market thing, it might be going up like this, but it goes like this.
Mm-hmm.
So you can find one of those days where you're having a bad day, but you have to look at the overall progress.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, the analogy I use a lot is like recovery is not a beautiful symmetrical staircase, right? It's all about the trend line of where you're going. Like as long as the stocks are going up, you're headed in the right direction. But it takes comparison of today compared to 3 days ago, today compared to a week, a month ago to really note that. It can be hard day to day to live in that just comparison, even just within the hour. It's difficult. Yeah. Sweet.
All right. Anybody?
Well, I just want to wrap up with just like you said about the analogy of a toolbox. We have to put those proper tools and use those tools properly. You know, um, there's so many different resources that I'm a large follower of YouTube. So I seek it, like I said, getting that information from YouTube. And we got so much information on the palm of our hands.
Hmm.
And I was just talking to Ralph a couple of months ago about AI.
Hmm.
He that just really just changed my whole perspective because like when I was kind of afraid of technology, because when I suffered my setback, it was like almost the boom of everything with internet and you know technology and stuff like that. So, like I allowed the fear. I think a lot of people allow fear. And then like I said, we got to look at it as fear, like the analogy of false evidence appearing real. So,
Hmm.
we can't allow that fear in our life. Or what if I have, because I was like, what if I have another stroke? And that will rob your entire life. So
Right.
might as well let's do what we're supposed to do and go from there. Because
Right.
like what Ralph was talking about, yes, there's no manual for our recovery.
Hmm.
So we have to really look at it like, okay, so basically you have to really add to your own toolbox what really fits you.
Right. Exactly.
There's only one demand, there's only one loop. We all somewhat the same, but we're not, but we have to know mentally where we are, and stuff
Right.
like that. And don't beat ourselves up, because certain things, like there's no perfect person on this recovery process where we are looking at like I have a part summer aphasia. I get caught up on words and everything like that. But I'm trying to seek my new normal
Hmm.
on dealing with this.
Hmm.
And it'll be 30 years for me in August. But I never really got to the point where I was gonna have a pity party and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
gonna cry and everything.
Right.
I had my crying days,
Right.
and it took me a while,
Right.
and it's just like sometimes those tears would just dry up, and
Right. Now you
it's
know.
time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Now you know
so
like what you want your life to look like. So it can be, it helps you to take
absolutely.
action on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. Like I said, when you interact with other people, like well, Ralph, that's now I'm in another couple groups that's stroke focused, and it's just like, man, so my weeks are filled
Right.
with groups
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's my rehab, to tell you
Yeah.
the truth.
Yeah.
That's free.
Yeah. It's
So
great.
we getting a lot of free knowledge, and like I said, Luke, I want to say thank you for your time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and for you to stand out to say, hey, I want to help this community.
Hmm.
And as a young man, and say, okay, I want to empower other people. That's major,
Hmm. I appreciate
because
that.
a lot of people can sit there and say, well, I'm going to chase this dollar, but the only way you can chase dollars is by chasing people and
Hmm.
helping people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and it's not about, well, I can go get this big house and all that stuff, but how would that fulfill you, mentally, emotionally, spiritually? So
Right.
we have to really look at the whole big picture of our community and helping people. And
Definitely.
that's the only way we can do that is providing hope for people. So keep up the good work, Luke,
Yeah.
and
No.
I'm really proud of you, young man. you
Yeah.
know,
I appreciate it, Damon. Thank you for
yeah,
taking your time and joining today.
yeah, yeah. Thank you.
All right, well, anybody else? Otherwise, we may as well go ahead and thank Luke and, oh, Carol, I didn't mean to shut you off.
Oh no, you're okay. I was going to say, I think something that I found useful in my sort of recovery is I always have, I think I've always been like this in life. I like to have a plan, a little plan, hopefully a simple one. I like to keep
Yeah.
it simple. So on those days when perhaps
things don't seem to be going well, or it's a grey day and I don't feel like moving, if I've got some simple plan that I'm trying to do every day, it's just that little push to do something.
Mhm.
I remember, because I thought it was a bit funny at the time, when I was in hospital, because I wasn't used to being in hospital, I didn't like being in hospital,
Mm.
and it dawned on me, like one day, like I think Ralph was saying, really, that they had resources there. There was physical therapy there and occupational therapy, but sometimes they'd come at a bad time and say, "Oh, are you coming out today?" And I was stuck in bed at the time. I was hoist only, so I could only get hoisted out of bed.
Right.
And I remember lying in bed one night and thinking, right, tomorrow I'm going to say yes to everything. Anytime when they come up and ask, do you want to do, are you doing physiotherapy, or do you want to get into the chair today? I'm going to say yes. I thought, right, today's the day I say yes to everything.
Yeah.
The first person who came to me was a doctor, and they basically said to me, do you want to go home today? So I said yes.
Wow, what a
So
coincidence.
a pity, really, I didn't get me say yes idea 2 weeks earlier or something. I came upon it a bit too late in the day, really.
Yeah.
But when it comes to moving, so to keep it simple, because when I first came out of hospital, I couldn't get out of bed. I had a little hoist, which I always used to think of as a crane, being craned out of bed. So
Right.
I was desperate to be able to stand up, and I found a poem, and I used to lie in bed before I got up in the day, and it said it was only the first two lines of the poem. Sorry, I won't bore you all. It's very quick, but it was the first two lines of this poem, and it said, "I got out of bed on two strong legs. It might have been otherwise." So I just used to concentrate on that in my mind. So I hope it got
Yeah.
the neuroplasticity moving.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
I
That's
wanted to get out of bed on two strong legs.
yeah,
But
thank
yeah,
you.
but I do think the idea of having a little plan, even
Yeah.
a simple plan, is
Right.
helpful.
And then when it's super difficult, like you're saying, like it's just so helpful to just have the list, right? It's not you eliminate the creativity, you eliminate the source of motivation if you just are checking things off a list. It's like you're just doing a task, and you set it the expectation for yourself the day before, just like saying yes, and now you're just executing. That's all you're doing. Yeah, thank you for that example. That was great.
One thing, important thing I found was to remember that nobody's going to do it for you.
Right.
End of story.
Yeah.
So, well, Luke, I want to thank you again for taking time out of your schedule to share your knowledge with us, and we all appreciate it. And for those of you watching out in YouTube land, all of Luke's contact information is linked LinkedIn and everything will be in the description underneath this video. So if you want to contact him, just look down underneath the title. It says ... more. Click that and you'll get a big long bunch of information. So thank you, Luke. We
Yeah,
really
thank
appreciate
you.
it. And
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Carol.
Thank you. Thank you.
yep.
Thank you.
Do all you can with what you have, in the time you have, in the place you are. Do all you can. Do all you can.